This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt Podcast. I'm running a promotion from now until the end of February. If you enjoy the show, leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts or even any of the other apps that have a review system. Take a screenshot, email it along with your name and address to admin@beyondcontemptpodcast.com, and I'll send you a podcast sticker. Thanks again for your support. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. Medical true crime is so fascinating and terrifying at the same time. I'll definitely be tackling more medical crimes in the future, but today you're listening to episode 17, Kimberly Saenz. Kimberly Clark Fowler was born on November 3rd, 1973 in Angelina County, Texas, to 21-year-old Kent and 19-year-old Bernie. In a stroke of luck, Kimberly's brother William arrived on her birthday 3 years later. Kimberly grew up in a blue-collar working-class family in Lufkin, Texas. Kent worked at Rush Truck Center, and Bernie worked at Walmart. Lufkin is a smallish East Texas city that is 120 miles northeast of Houston and has a population of 35,000. The crime rate in Lufkin trends higher than the average crime rate in America, with most of that being property crime or larceny and theft. They average about 1 murder per year. As is customary in many East Texas homes, Kent and Bernie tried to instill religious morals in their children. Kimberly and William instead bucked religious doctrine and blazed their own paths in life, which directly led them to attaining criminal records. Kimberly was good at sports, especially softball, but she didn't put in a lot of work or have much passion for it. The same went for her academics. Kimberly wasn't as motivated as the other students to work at it. She was a cheerleader for a few years, but wasn't enthusiastic about it. Her classmates described her as a quiet and sullen girl who didn't fit into the landscape at Central High School in Lufkin. She was invisible to most of her peers because very few of her schoolmates claimed to know her. In 1990, during her sophomore year at Central High School, Kimberly started dating a popular and successful senior named Chris Hopper. He was a strong student-athlete who also took part in many extracurricular activities that included yearbook and National Honor Society. After Chris graduated, Kimberly gave up all the extracurricular activities she participated in because she only had eyes for Chris. Prior to her senior year on July 26, 1991, she gave birth to a son named Jacob Hopper and dropped out of high school after completing up to the 11th grade. The rumor floating around high school was that Kimberly purposely got pregnant to sustain a relationship with Chris. Their peers thought Chris and Kimberly wouldn't last because they were so opposite and believed that she was wrong for him. If Kimberly's intention was to trap Chris, it worked, because on September 9th, 1991, 19-year-old Chris married 17-year-old Kimberly. Sometime after their marriage, she got into a serious car accident and became addicted to pain medication. Their marriage lasted a few years, and the couple divorced on September 30, 1997. Around that time, Kimberly then started working for Fleetwood Transportation Services, which was a trucking company in Diebold, Texas, which was not far away from Lufkin. On September 9th, 1999, they rushed Kimberly to a hospital in Lufkin that diagnosed her with pneumonia. But her pneumonia was so medically significant that Lufkin transferred her to a hospital over 100 miles away in Houston for treatment. This event was described as a near-death illness in Kimberly's life, and it propelled her into becoming a Christian. While working at the trucking company, Kimberly started dating a co-worker named Kevin Saenz. Kevin had recently moved to Lufkin from Houston. He had a bit of a record and had just been paroled from prison after serving time on felony drug charges. Their relationship had progressed quickly, and 31-year-old Kevin married 27-year-old Kimberly on June 10, 2000. She was a few months pregnant and quit her job at Fleetwood Transportation Services 2 weeks later. On December 22, 2000, Kimberly gave birth to a daughter named Madison. 2 years later, she enrolled in Angelina Community College's nursing program and graduated in December of 2004 as a licensed vocational nurse. LVN is a term exclusive to Texas and California. In other states, the equivalent would be an LPN. Licensed vocational nurses work underneath doctors and nurses. Some of their duties might include monitoring vital signs, dressing wounds, administering medications, and starting IVs. After graduation from community college, Kimberly started working for Memorial Hospital in Lufkin, but only stayed there for 5 months. A month after leaving Memorial Hospital, Kimberly started working for Woodland Heights Hospital, which was the only other one in Lufkin. 2 months later, in August 2005, Kimberly was terminated for stealing the narcotic Demerol. It was also reported that she gave Demerol to patients not in pain and had no reason to take it. After the Woodland Heights termination, Kimberly searched for a new nursing job. The Texas State Board of Nursing hadn't yet investigated the Demerol theft, so there were no disciplinary actions taken with her nursing license. Federal law only allows employers to inform potential new employers if they would hire an employee back or not. They're not allowed to offer a reason. Because of all these things, Kimberly landed another nursing job at Right Choice Home Health. When she started that job, she was a good employee, and everyone thought she was enjoyable to be around. This version of Kimberly didn't last long. She showed up late to work and exhibited a somber attitude. Kimberly never called her employer to let them know when she would be late, and she would often no-call, no-show. It wasn't surprising when Right Choice fired her. Kevin said that his wife became so depressed that she couldn't get out of bed. Kimberly sought treatment for depression and suicidal thoughts from Brentwood Hospital in Shreveport, Louisiana. After she got out of the hospital, she applied to work at Lufkin State School. This was a state-funded facility for people with cognitive disabilities. Kimberly started that job on October 1, 2006, and was fired by the end of the month. On November 27, 2006, Kimberly began her 5th nursing job in just over a year at Children's Clinic of Lufkin. On March 20, 2007, they wrote Kimberly up for 8.5 days worth of no-call, no-shows at the Children's Clinic. On May 29, 2007, she was terminated. Kimberly applied for unemployment but was denied. On June 7, 2007, Kimberly and Kevin got into an argument in their Pollock, Texas home. Kevin left the house and headed to his mother's boyfriend's house, and Kimberly chased after him. Their altercation turned physical, and she injured Kevin. The police were called, and they arrested Kimberly for public intoxication and criminal trespassing. They charged her with misdemeanor assault, and she spent the night in jail. On June 8, 2007, Kevin placed an emergency protective order against his wife. Kevin and Kimberly eventually worked things out, even though she hurt her husband a second time, which resulted in another restraining order. In August 2007, she was hired at DaVita Lufkin Dialysis Center. Kimberly was excited about this job and believed she was lucky to have been hired. And she was right. The State Board of Nursing still hadn't investigated the Demerol allegations, so her nursing license was still intact. DaVita hired her even though she was fired by 5 previous employers who said they would not hire her back. Perhaps they were desperately in need of nurses. Kimberly received 10 weeks of training when she started at DaVita. Typical dialysis treatments take place in a hospital setting, or sometimes in the patient's home. DaVita clinics were an alternative to hospitals in that they provided in-home or in-clinic dialysis treatment. DaVita has treated over 200,000 dialysis patients in 10 different countries. Patients with kidney failure require dialysis to remove excess fluids and waste from their bloodstream. They often go to the clinic 3 times per week for treatment, and they must continue this for the rest of their lives unless they receive a transplant. The average life expectancy of a patient on dialysis is 5 to 10 years, but some patients have lived as long as 30 years. At DaVita, there were 3 levels of medical staff, with registered nurses having the most responsibility, LVNs, and patient care technicians. The patient care technician could do most everything an LVN could except administer medicine. On April 1st, 2008, two DaVita patients, 68-year-old Thelma Metcalf and 77-year-old Clara Strange, died after suffering cardiac arrest. Clara Strange's patient care technician for that day was Werlin Gullery. Clara complained of shortness of breath and was given oxygen. She seemed to be stable for a few hours, so Werlin took a break while Saenz stepped in and watched over Clara. When Werlin came back, Clara was unresponsive. She was transported to the hospital, but couldn't be revived. In Clara's chart, Saenz documented that she lowered her blood flow rate from 400 to 300 milliliters per minute, but there was nothing that Werlin could see in the chart that justified taking this action. Lowering or elevating a patient's blood flow rate will cause the alarm on the dialysis machine to go off. Werlin later testified that when he told Saenz what happened to the patient, it seemed like she could care less. Clara Strange's dialysis lines tested positive for bleach. Her blood was not tested for 3-chlorotyrosine, which is a marker for chlorine exposure. Clara was born on November 6, 1930, in Pollock, Texas, to parents Odie and Lawrence. She grew up in the Lufkin area and lived there the majority of her life. Clara worked at and retired from Lufkin State School. She was married to A.C. Strange, but he passed away prior to her death. She loved quilting and cooking. Clara was devoted to her family and held the title of great-grandmother. Her funeral took place on April 6, 2008, at the First Baptist Church in Lawrencewood, where she had been a devoted member. Thelma Metcalf's patient care technician that day was Saenz. 30 minutes after Clara was found unresponsive, Thelma was also found unresponsive. She wasn't breathing and her pulse was absent. Another patient care technician, Corey Smith, helped Saenz perform CPR. She wasn't performing CPR correctly, so he just took over. Another nurse, Dale Sockwell, said that he performed CPR on Metcalf and that Saenz wasn't even around. Thelma Metcalf was transported to the hospital, but she was not revived. Saenz documented that she lowered Thelma's blood flow rate from 300 to 200 milliliters per minute, which was lower than the optimal ranges, but it was warranted because her blood pressure was near the maximum limit. Thelma's dialysis lines tested positive for bleach. Her blood was not tested for the 3-chlorotyrosine. Thelma Fran Metcalf was born on August 3, 1939. She married Walter Metcalf Sr. in 1960. Thelma was devoted to her family and loved spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Thelma Metcalf's funeral was held on April 6, 2008, at the Shady Chapel United Methodist Church in Zavala, Texas, where she was a devoted member. Just 2 weeks later, on April 16, 2008, 58-year-old Garland Kelly's patient care technician was Sharon Dearmon, and his medication nurse was Saenz. A few hours into dialysis, the patient care technician heard Garland's machine go off, and she discovered Saenz standing next to the unresponsive patient. Saenz said that she was just going to turn the alarm off and reset it. Sharon started CPR and told Saenz to leave the machine and get help. Garland died on August 15, 2008. The patient care technician later testified that she saw a clot in the arterial chamber of his dialysis machine. Garland's dialysis lines tested positive for bleach, and so did the syringe attached to the dialysis line. His blood tested positive for the 3-chlorotyrosine. Garland Kelly Jr. was born on November 9, 1949, in Lufkin, Texas, to parents Garland and Jimmy Lee. He married his wife LaFrancis in 1969. His funeral was held at the New Zion Baptist Church on August 23, 2008. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. As you all know, following true crime cases is my thing, but even I need an occasional break. So when I feel like I need to take a break, my go-to refresher is the mobile puzzle game, Best Fiends. Best Fiends is a puzzle game that you can play right on your phone, and it's really neat because you go through all these levels, solving challenging puzzles that actually engage your brain. I just made it to level 43, and I only started playing on Christmas Eve. The great thing about it is that it doesn't take up much of your time, But it's great in that it fills up those moments where you wish you had something to do, aside from scrolling through Facebook over and over again. The other day, I was a passenger in the car traveling to my in-laws for the holidays, and the trip was taken forever, but having this game to play made the time go by much faster. You also don't need an internet connection to play it, so it's convenient for when you don't have any connection, like on an airplane, for example. And Best Fiends updates the game monthly with new levels and events, so it never gets old. Engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. And now, back to the show. Also on April 16th, Graciela Castaneda lost consciousness at the DaVita clinic. There was conflicting information in that the paramedics didn't remember a blockage in Graciela's airway, but the hospital documented removing gum from her airway. Graciela was previously diagnosed with pneumonia. When her dialysis line was tested, it was inconclusive for bleach. Her blood was positive for the 3-chlorotyrosine, and she had an elevated lactate dehydrogenase, which is a general marker for tissue damage. After the incident on April 16th, Graciela suffered from memory loss and started using oxygen. On April 22, 2008, 64-year-old Cora Bryant's patient care technician was Martha Mann. During dialysis, Cora had issues with her blood clotting, and her dialysis lines had to be replaced. Later on, when Martha was on break, Cora's dialysis machine alarm went off. And when a dialysis alarm goes off, blood stops flowing to the patient. Another DaVita employee saw Saenz try to reset the machine. She noticed that Cora was in stable condition and was watching TV. The employee started the machine and the blood returned to Cora. Immediately, Cora wanted to know what she was just given. She then went into cardiac arrest and was transported to the hospital, but then died later on July 15, 2008. Cora's dialysis lines were negative for bleach. Her blood tested positive for the 3-chlorotyrosine, and her lactate dehydrogenase level was elevated. Her LDH was 20 to 27 times higher than it would be in a cardiac arrest patient. Cora Louise Flemon Bryant was born on May 10, 1943, in St. Augustine, Texas. Her funeral was held on July 21, 2008, at First Missionary Baptist Church. One expert later testified that Garland Kelly and Cora Bryant's LDH levels were the highest he'd ever seen. On April 23, 2008, Saenz charted that she gave medication to Marie Bradley. Later that day at the clinic, Marie had a severe episode of hypotension. They took her to the hospital and she woke up 3.5 days later with no memory of what happened. Her dialysis line tested positive for bleach, and so did a syringe containing Zemplar, a common medication given to patients with kidney failure. Marie's blood tested positive for 3-chlorotyrosine, and her LDH was elevated. On April 26, 2008, 91-year-old Opal Fuse patient care technician was Donna Hartsfield. Less than 30 minutes into dialysis, Opal's alarm went off, and Donna found her unresponsive. They took her to the hospital, where they found she had suffered a cardiac arrest. Opal died later that day. Donna would go on to say that she didn't remember seeing Saenz at work that day. But another nurse, Sharon Smith, claimed that she told Saenz to dispense medication to Opal. Nurse Sharon later saw that Opal's chart didn't reflect that Saenz had given her medication. Sharon told her to fix the chart, and Saenz wrote that she gave Opal a dose of Zemplar at 9:05 a.m. On another patient's chart, Saenz had written that she removed the patient's dialysis lines at 9 a.m. Since removing those lines takes more than 5 minutes, there was a discrepancy in Saenz's timeline. Opal's dialysis line tested positive for bleach, and so did a syringe found in the sharps container. On the day of the incident, the syringe was labeled as Opal's and should have contained Zemplar. Her blood was not tested. Opal May Jordan Few was born on October 13, 1916, in Pollock, Texas, to Daisy and Benjamin. She was fortunate enough to be a great-great-grandmother Opal was a member of the Lotus Lane House of Prayer. Her funeral was held at the Gibson Funeral Home Chapel on April 28, 2008. Also on April 26, Saenz recorded that she dispensed medication to Deborah Oates. Several hours later, Deborah had a strange taste in her mouth and wanted to know what Saenz had given her. Nurse Sharon Smith later said that she saw Saenz give Deborah Oates something with a syringe, then toss the syringe in the sharps container. Deborah then had a drop in blood pressure, chest pain, difficulty breathing, and felt like her bones were being crushed. She experienced nausea and vomiting, and her tubing site wouldn't stop bleeding. Deborah Oates was transported to the hospital, where she stayed for a few days. She also had a similar experience in January 2008, where she had to go to the hospital. Deborah's dialysis lines were not tested. Her blood tested positive for 3-chlorotyrosine, and her LDH was elevated. Following the first deaths on April 1, 2008, clinical coordinator Amy Clinton went to the DaVita clinic the next day to investigate. Clinton later testified that she was there to look at the medical care that Thelma Metcalf and Clara Strange received prior to their passing. She was also there to establish changes to DaVita policies to reduce the clinic's liability and to protect patient safety. She reassigned tasks that the nurses typically performed. Some nurses would be the only ones to administer medication, and other nurses were relegated to cleaning and monitoring tasks. Clinton also switched over to single-use machines and individual monitors. On April 28, 2008, Saenz was told by clinical coordinator Clinton that she would be working as a patient care technician for the day. Saenz did not like this reassignment because she felt that this task was beneath her, and her abilities were beyond that of a patient care technician. Clinton later testified that she could tell that this reassignment upset Saenz, and other employees even witnessed her tearing up. Saenz went outside for a cigarette break and had to be talked into coming back to work. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Hi everyone. I wanted to tell you about BetterHelp Online Counseling. It's an affordable service where you can connect with one of their 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists. You can find counselors that specialize in anxiety, depression, stress, relationships, trauma, grief, or LGBT issues. I work from home and don't often like to leave my house, so I really appreciate that you can communicate with your counselor from the privacy of your own home via text, chat, phone, or video. So if you've been thinking about getting counseling, there's never been a better time, because Beyond Contempt True Crime listeners will get 10% off their first month with a discount code Beyond Contempt. To get started today, go to betterhelp.com/beyondcontempt. Fill out the questionnaire to help them determine your needs and get matched with a counselor that you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/beyondcontempt. Now, back to the show. On April 28th, Marva Roan's patient care technician was Angie Rodriguez. Angie took a break, and either patient care technician Tammy Grant or Kimberly Saenz watched her patients. Grant later stated that when she was watching those patients, she didn't see Saenz. When Angie got back from break, Marva's blood pressure had dropped. She wasn't feeling well, and the pain in her ribs was causing her considerable discomfort. She became nauseous, weak, and had difficulty speaking. Her symptoms were recorded as lasting for 6 minutes. Marva did not go to the hospital. Also, she had recently been in a car accident, which caused pain in her ribs. But Marva's dialysis lines tested positive for bleach. Her blood tested positive for 3-chlorotyrosine, and her LDH and potassium levels were elevated. That same day, on April 28th, Carolyn Rissinger's patient care technician was Tammy Grant. While undergoing dialysis, Carolyn started flopping in her chair and became hot. They gave her oxygen and saline, but she did not go to the hospital. Grant later said that she might have taken a break, but she never saw Saenz that morning. One patient later said that he never saw Saenz go near Marva's machine. Marva's dialysis lines and blood were not tested. On April 28th, 2 patients, Ms. Hamilton and Ms. Hall, witnessed Saenz make a bleach solution. She poured the solution into a bucket on the floor. She filled the syringe with the solution and then injected it into Marva and Carolyn's IV lines. She then discarded the syringes into a sharps container. The two witnessing patients told clinical coordinator Amy Clinton that they thought Saenz looked nervous. Ms. Hamilton rightfully spoke up about her concerns of Saenz being assigned to her. Coordinator Clinton questioned Saenz about injecting bleach into the patient's IVs. Saenz claimed she was cleaning the lines of a vacant dialysis machine and had only used the syringe to get a precise measurement. Saenz said she didn't give any patients medication or inject bleach into their IV lines. Clinton wisely sent her home for the day so she could investigate. Amy Clinton took the sharps container and tested the syringes for bleach with the test strips that were used to check the dialysis machines for bleach residue in the water lines. 3 of the syringes tested positive for bleach. Clinton immediately called her supervisors, the CDC, the Texas Health Department, and eventually the police. On April 29, 2008, a mandatory meeting was called at DaVita. All the employees except Saenz attended. One of her co-workers, Werlin Gullery, called Saenz to ask her where she was. She said she was at her daughter's field day. Werlin explained that if she didn't go to the meeting, she could be fired. Saenz just said okay. After the meeting, Werlin went to see Saenz and found that she was disheveled. She acted like she didn't recognize her DaVita coworker. Saenz was crying and claimed to have not killed those patients, even though no one had formally accused her of killing anyone. She was terminated that day, and DaVita temporarily shut down while the investigations took place, and they did not reopen until July 2, 2008. They issued a statement. We believe the events that led to our voluntary closing of the Lufkin Dialysis Center were the result of a criminal act by an individual who has been terminated and is no longer working at the center. On April 29, 2008, during an interview with police, Saenz made incoherent statements and had a hard time focusing during the questioning. It was almost as if she were intoxicated. This has never been proven, but she might have taken something immediately prior to her interview. She was upset that the 2 patients made accusations against her and claimed that she followed all work procedures to the letter. Police asked Saenz if she administered any medications on April 28th, and she said she gave Marva Rowan saline to treat her cramping. Marva's nurse wasn't there, so Saenz opened her line and delivered normal saline. She claimed that the patient's blood pressure did not decline much, but the patient became nauseated. Police asked Saenz what she thought was happening to patients at DaVita. Saenz questioned the bleach found in the loop on the dialysis machines and claimed that they all will have some amount of bleach. In this interview, she was the first person to bring up anything about bleach. Police then asked Saenz about the clinic's bleaching procedures. She told them that they used a medicine cup to measure the bleach. Police asked her if she had ever used a syringe to measure bleach, and Saenz admitted that she had in the past when she couldn't find medicine cups. She told the police that on April 28th, she couldn't find any of the medicine cups to measure out the bleach, so she used a syringe instead. She had to put the bleach in a container to use the syringe. And after she put the bleach in the container, she drew 10 cc's via the syringe, because she knew that it would be very close to 10 milliliters, which was the amount needed for cleaning. She told the police that she didn't trust the dialysis monitor to accurately rinse with the correct volume of bleach. Saenz claimed that patient safety was important to her. She made a habit of pushing the bleach with the syringe because she wasn't sure when it was last done, potentially harming the DaVita patients. Her interview lasted approximately a half an hour before Saenz lawyered up. In April 2008, an official from the fire department sent an anonymous letter to the state health department inspectors and wanted them to investigate DaVita Dialysis Clinic. This letter writer wanted them to know that they had been called to the DaVita clinic 30 times that month and had transported 16 patients to the hospital in the last 2 weeks. This was a disturbing trend, given that prior to April, they had only received 2 calls from DaVita in the previous 15 months. Patients who receive dialysis are at a higher risk for cardiac arrest. However, the amount of patients who die while receiving dialysis is rare. investigators found that there was no evidence to support Kimberly's statement that she couldn't find any medicine cups to measure out the bleach. The FDA investigated the blood tubing, IV bags, and syringes used by the DaVita patients. They found that some of the samples tested positive for bleach. Other samples showed that bleach may have been present at one time. Bleach is a common cleaning agent found in dialysis clinics. It's diluted with water and used to wipe down equipment and patient chair surfaces. The machines are internally cleaned with a bleach solution once a week. The lines are then tested to ensure that all the bleach has been removed and the machine is safe for patients. The Texas Department of Health had dozens of findings when they examined DaVita's disinfecting logs. Entries were incomplete or had been updated at a later time. In a regulatory environment, every task an employee performs must be documented completely and in real time. Investigators took computers and laptops from the Saenz home and from her parents' house. Some of the phrases that have been searched for on Yahoo between April 2nd and May 3rd, 2008 were bleach poisoning, bleach given during dialysis, can bleach be detected in dialysis lines, and dialysis patient symptoms of bleach infusion. Interestingly enough, on April 2nd, before her shift began, Saenz had performed one of these searches, knowing that someone was coming to DaVita to investigate. And at that point, no one on DaVita's staff had mentioned anything about bleach. On May 30th, 2008, 34-year-old Kimberly Saenz was arrested. She was initially charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for the 2 April 28th bleach injections. Authorities were fairly certain she committed the murders, but in Texas, it was notoriously difficult to convict medical professionals of wrongdoing. They wanted to charge her with something while they continued the investigation, and perhaps, deep down, they were hoping for a confession scenario. These charges were significant enough, as they were second-degree felonies. Her bail was set at $200,000. Saenz made bail and was released. The investigation at DaVita continued while she was out in the free world. It would take several months to collect the evidence, but on April 1st, 2009, Saenz was indicted for 1 count of capital murder for the 5 victims: Clara Strange, Thelma Metcalf, Opal Few, Garland Kelly, and Cora Bryant. And she was charged with 5 counts of aggravated assault for those that were harmed but survived: Marva Roan, Carolyn Rissinger, Deborah Oates, Graciela Castaneda, and Marie Bradley. On April 2nd, 2009, Saenz turned herself into police. On April 9th, 2009, she was released on $500,000 bond. In 2009, she applied for a nursing job, even though she was not allowed to work in a healthcare setting per her bail agreement. On her application, she stated that she was working at a roofing company, and the phone number she put down to use as a reference was her husband's cell phone number. The upsetting fact was that she got the job, which entailed working with children in a healthcare setting. Kimberly Saenz's trial began on March 5th, 2012, in the 159th District Courtroom in Angelina County, Texas. State District Judge Barry Bryant oversaw the trial. District Attorney Clyde Harrington and Assistant U.S. Attorney Christopher Totorice prosecuted the case. Jurors were told that Saenz killed 5 patients by injecting bleach into their dialysis lines in April 2008. Every single patient who died had directly interacted with her. The prosecutors laid out all the evidence found during the investigation. Kimberly's defense attorneys were Ryan Deaton and Stephen Taylor. Attorney Deaton was known as Stretch the Truth and took liberties when it came to painting outside the lines of reality. The defense told the jury that Saenz had lacked a motive to harm or kill patients. They depicted her as a solid, compassionate nurse who cared for her patients and was liked by everyone. The defense said that DaVita was using her to cover up for their mistakes, policy violations, and insufficient procedures. He claimed that the clinic was using his client to cover up for their poor track record of sick and dead patients. Attorney Deaton even said that DaVita manufactured evidence against Kimberly. The defendant had not been at the clinic every single time a patient felt chest pain or had a cardiac arrest. Saenz was there 84% of the time, One staff member was there for 89% of the instances, and another staff member was there 100% of the time for the adverse events. He claimed that his client was conscientious, and this is why she measured bleach with a syringe to ensure that she had the proper volume to clean out the machine's tubing. Plus, the defense theorized that bleach may not even have been what harmed DaVita patients because chest pain and cardiac arrest are generalized syndromes. They're not specifically caused by bleach infusion. Saenz did not testify at her trial. A recording of her police interview and the testimony at a grand jury hearing were played. In the recording, Saenz said that she felt DaVita treated her unfairly and that she would never harm her patients. She claimed to have injected saline into Marva Roan's machine because clots were forming in the tubing. Being accused of injecting bleach into patient lines prompted her internet searches about effects from bleach poisoning. Saenz said, after DaVita brought in new monitors, she became extra cautious when she cleaned with bleach. She said that before the new monitors arrived, employees would just mix bleach and water in a bucket and bleach the machines. DaVita became much stricter about having staff follow their protocols, and that's what led her to using the syringe when she couldn't find a medicine cup. Because the syringe needle couldn't reach the bleach in the bottle, Saenz would pour the bleach into one container, draw the bleach up with a syringe, then put it in a second container, and in that second container, she'd dilute out the bleach with water. 59 people in total testified at her trial. One employee who worked with Saenz confirmed that she didn't like her job or some of the patients. The patients that she didn't care for happened to be the ones that were harmed or died. DaVita employees testified that their policy on cleaning equipment was to use measuring cups to accurately dispense bleach and never syringes. There were a few employees who believed that it was common to use syringes to measure the bleach, but their voices were in the minority. A medical expert testified that injecting bleach into a patient could cause breathing difficulties, hypotension, tachycardia, or might result in cardiac arrest. Dr. Mark Schwartz, a physician and toxicologist from the CDC, testified that each victim died from the injection of bleach into their dialysis port, and it was impossible to determine the amount of bleach in a person's blood. Bleach will react quickly inside the body and breaks down a hypochlorous acid, which damages tissues and organs. Another doctor who specialized in nephrology said that in 12 years of practicing, he only saw 2 patients die while undergoing dialysis. He testified that a recent study found that the chance of having a cardiac arrest while going through dialysis was rare, 0.007% rare. Another expert witness testified that turning down the blood flow rate on a dialysis machine prevents the machine from alarming, and 3 of the deceased patients had their blood flow rate appropriately decreased. The jury deliberated for 14 hours and found Kimberly Saenz guilty of 3 counts of aggravated assault against Marva Roan, Deborah Oates, and Marie Bradley. She was not guilty on the 2 counts of aggravated assault for Carolyn Rissinger and Graciela Castaneda. They found her guilty of capital murder. As the judge read the verdict, Saenz let out an audible gasp. The capital murder charge meant that the jury had to agree that she killed 2 out of the 5 victims, and they did not have to agree on the same victims. While her being found not guilty on 2 counts of aggravated assault was a bit of a head-scratcher, Carolyn and Graciela had a different symptomology picture compared to others. There were alternative explanations for their symptoms other than bleach. There was no documented contact between Saenz and Carolyn. Carolyn's blood work and dialysis lines were never tested. Graciela doesn't remember who administered her medication on the day she went ill. A few days later, on April 2, 2012, the jury deliberated for 45 minutes over whether Saenz should get the death penalty. They decided against the death penalty for her, since she wouldn't cause any future harm or death, given that she could no longer inject patients with bleach. Kimberly Saenz was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, and she received 60 years for her 3 counts of aggravated assault. All sentences were to run concurrently. On January 22, 2014, the Court of Appeals of Texas, San Antonio, affirmed Saenz's conviction and overruled the 21 appeal filings. Some of the 21 issues included a jury charge error, a lack of juror unanimity, ineffective assistance of counsel, insufficiency of the evidence, improper exclusion of evidence, and improper admission of expert testimony. In her initial appeal, Saenz brought up that she wasn't allowed to use Nurse Sharon Smith as an alternative perpetrator of the crime because it hadn't been allowed in court. Nurse Sharon Smith was allegedly having an affair with a married man and tried to kill this man with a knife. After the attempted murder, the married man received a syringe in the mail with an anonymous note that read, "Inject this. Bang, bang. They're coming to test it." The syringe was never tested for bleach, so this alternative perpetrator theory never gained legs in court. On December 11th, 2014, the Texas Court of Appeals reversed the January 22nd decision. The charge to the jury required the jury to unanimously agree that she killed at least 2 out of the 5 victims, but they didn't have to agree on the same victims. Because the defense did not object to this jury charge, an egregious harm analysis needed to take place. On August 26, 2015, the Court of Appeals of Texas San Antonio found that Saenz's sentence did not establish egregious harm, and the trial court's January 22, 2014 decision was reaffirmed. Kimberly Saenz is serving her time in Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. After the Saenz incident, DaVita changed some of their policies, which included daily testing of water prior to setting up the dialysis machines. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. If you haven't listened to it yet, you really need to listen to the podcast Dr. Death. I thought it was one of the best medical true crime podcasts that I've ever heard. Thank you to new patron Caitlin J. for supporting the show at the $2 level. I'll be sending your sticker out in the mail this week, and you should have access to commercial-free episodes. This isn't advertised, but I'll also be publishing a monthly update episode for those at the $2 level. Please visit BeyondContemptPodcast.com for links to the sources used in this episode. This episode was researched by Haley Gray. Script writing, editing, and all audio production were performed by me. If you like the show, please leave me a favorable review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Let me tell you about the Apple for the Teacher podcast. I'm Anna Thomas, a teacher and your host. So you're probably thinking it's about reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Well, think again. It's a fresh take on true crime, where you wouldn't expect to find true crime. In schools. Yes, schools. You will hear tragic stories about murder, abduction, school bus hijack, student disappearance, suicide, kidnap and ransom, a school camp tragedy, the list goes on. So if you're looking for something a little different in the true crime genre, then Apple for the Teacher is for you. So join me as I present the bad apples. But until then, remember to be a good apple.